Okay, we are going to dive straight into a case today that is just so disturbing and so terrifyingly calculated that it literally left a permanent scar on an entire city. This is the story of the black hole of Nehe and the absolute monster at the center of it all, a man named Jia Wenge. Right off the bat, I want you to imagine a truly horrifying scenario. Seriously, put yourself in these shoes for a second. What would you do if you woke up in complete pitch-black darkness, and you quickly realized you couldn't even stretch your arms out without hitting cold, damp walls? You try to move, right? But there's something thick and sticky coating the floor beneath you. It's clinging to your skin. The smell is unbearable, just rotten, like death has been trapped in there for days. And then, with mounting panic, it hits you. You haven't just been locked in a room. You've been dumped into a grave.
Well, that horrifying grave actually existed. It was in Nehe, which was this quiet little town in Heilongjiang province, right up near the Russian border. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, this town picked up a really dark, whispered nickname. People called it the place where people who don't want to live go. And it wasn't because of the brutal winters or anything like that. It was because people were simply vanishing. Literally, after sunset, it was like the city would just swallow them whole. No clues left behind, no bodies found, just gone.
Section 1. The Making of a Monster. From Factory Worker to Serial Killer.
So, to actually understand this nightmare, we have to look really closely at Jia Wenge. Born in 1965, he was this handsome, smooth, really polite factory worker. But underneath all that charm, he was a highly manipulative predator. After he lost his job and his marriage fell apart, his obsession with money and absolute control sent him into this deadly downward spiral. And he developed a terrifyingly precise system. Step 1. Use his clean-cut demeanor to charm vulnerable people. Step 2. Invite them back to his place for a cup of drugged tea. Step 3. The murder. He'd usually strangle his victims because he got a sick rush of control from it. And finally, Step 4. Dropping their bodies into a hidden pit right beneath his floorboards.
Now, think about this number for a second, 20. The sheer scale of what he did entirely on his own is just staggering. Jia managed to murder 20 people single-handedly, and he did this in a super short window, just between July and November of 1990. 20 people completely vanished without a trace, and the local police had absolutely zero leads. He was operating flawlessly under the radar, totally hiding behind that nice guy facade.
And the violence just escalated at breakneck speed. It all kicked off in July 1990 with one single impulsive murder. He killed a young woman simply because she was carrying an expensive handbag. That's it. By November, like we said, the missing persons count crossed 20. But Jia didn't stop there. By early 1991, he started recruiting others, these broken, desperate individuals to form an actual gang. Fast forward to October 1991, and this syndicate of death was responsible for 64 horrifying crimes.
Once Jia brought in accomplices, specifically guys like Liu Hua, the depravity just went completely off the charts. We're not just talking strangulation and robbery anymore. The gang started dismembering the bodies. And, according to the actual court records, they committed acts of cannibalism. They were literally carving out victims' hearts and livers, stir-frying them with vegetables and eating them with wine. They even severely mutilated completely innocent people just walking by. It was an absolute reign of terror. The town of Nehe practically turned into a ghost town drenched in fear.
Section 2. Escape from the Cellar. Shoelish's Nightmare.
Now, the central government knew about these disappearances, right? But they had no answers. Not until a woman completely unwittingly crossed paths with our monster. Her name was Xu Lixia, and she was a kindergarten teacher who just wanted a quiet, normal life. One freezing night in 1990, after a bad fight with her husband, she was sitting all alone at a railway station, super vulnerable. And who approaches her? Jia Wenge. Elegantly dressed, playing the role of a gentle, caring factory director. Preying totally on her vulnerability, he offered her a job and a safe place to stay. Missing the red flags, she accepted the offer and followed him home.
Once inside his freezing house, he handed her the drugged tea. She took a sip, and her memory just went completely black. Jia, assuming she was dead, stole what little money she had and tossed her into his cellar. But here's the thing, she wasn't dead. She woke up gasping for air at the bottom of a 9-foot-deep pit.
What she realized next is quite literally the stuff of nightmares. She wasn't lying on a dirt floor. She was standing on decomposing human flesh. Dozens of rotting corpses melting together into this jelly-like decay. The walls of this pit were 9 feet high and incredibly slick, But fueled entirely by this desperate primal need to see her child again, Shu started to claw her way up the sides. She actually had to use the more solid bodies of Jaya's previous victims as a literal ladder, scraping her hands and knees raw just to reach the top. So she finally drags herself out of that pit, absolutely covered in filth, and guess who is standing right there waiting for her? Jia. He raised a heavy shovel to her head. She dropped to her knees, crying, begging for her life. And Jia hesitated. He suddenly realized this woman could actually be useful to him. So he looked at her and delivered this terrifying ultimatum. I will spare your life, but you will help me. And if you don't, your husband, your child, they will pay.
Section 3. Deal with the devil. The honey trap.
To protect her family from this psychopath, Shu Lixia made the ultimate, unimaginable sacrifice of her own morality. She became his obedient, hollow-eyed accomplice. Using her looks, she acted as bait, luring over a dozen men back to that exact same house of horrors. In just 1 year, fueled by Shu running the traps and Jia operating safely from the shadows, the gang's violence just exploded. They committed a staggering 64 crimes. The scale of this tragedy grew so immense simply because Jia figured out how to weaponize a captive woman's love for her child.
But, no one hides forever. The breaking point finally arrived on October 22, 1991. The police happened to be running this massive province-wide sting operation to crack down on missing persons and extortion scams. An undercover officer working the Suzhou railway station caught Shu in the middle of running a honey trap. They brought her and 2 of her male companions in for questioning. When they searched them, they found fake IDs and a bunch of high-dosage sedatives. And when they finally ran their names, massive alarm bells started ringing.
So, during routine processing, a plainclothes officer looks at Shu and asks one simple final question. Anything else you want to confess? Shu just froze. She knew in her gut this was her one and only shot. She broke her silence right then and there. She told them everything about the dozen of bodies buried under the floorboards. The officers looked pretty skeptical at first, but then she uttered these desperate words. I am not lying. Please take me to your director. I will show you. And she led them straight to the house.
Section 4. 42 lives, 42 shots. The final judgment.
On October 26th, police and forensic doctors totally swarmed the property. They pried open a heavy concrete slab in the cellar, and the horror became absolutely undeniable. From that single pit of thick, jelly-like decay, investigators painstakingly pulled out and identified 42 bodies. The victims were 24 women and 18 men, people of all different ages, totally different backgrounds, all ending up in the exact same dark hole. And tragically, only 28 of those victims were ever even claimed by their families. When they interrogated Jia about it, he literally just shrugged, claiming he couldn't exactly remember how many people he'd killed.
Now here is where the justice system's hammer came down, and it fell equally hard on everyone involved. Despite being the victim who miraculously survived the pit, and despite being the one person to expose the entire operation to the police, Shu Lixia was sentenced to death for her role in the murders. Right before her execution, she wrote this hauntingly self-aware letter to her sister. It read, I know that I am guilty of a deep sin, and I die willingly. Fortunately, this case has finally come to an end.
In January 1992, the sentences were carried out. Jia Wengjie and his surviving accomplices were paraded through the town in the back of an open truck, forced to face the screaming, furious crowds of the very city he had terrorized. Then, Jia was executed by firing squad, and in a moment of absolute poetic justice, he received exactly 42 shots, 1 bullet for every single life he took.
So as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with a really provocative and unsettling question. Look at the tragic, heartbreaking trajectory of Shu Lixia. When forced to choose between the certain death of your own family and the lives of strangers, did this victim-turned-accomplice truly deserve her fate? It's a really dark, moral gray area in a case that is otherwise just black and white, absolute evil. This whole story is a grim reminder that monsters don't always hide in the dark, Sometimes they walk right beside us dressed in a sharp suit, offering a warm cup of tea. Think about that for a while. And hey, thank you so much for joining